Hello, everyone. Acacia, the CEO legal coach here. We are back to doing our lives. I'm so excited because this one was inspired by one of my recent client talks. She had a customer refuse to pay her, even though she had done all of the work and done everything on time for delivery. He still refused. So that is what we're going to be talking about today is acceptance terms in SOWs. Now, acceptance terms are possible in, quite frankly, any type of deliverable, even a physical product. But when they're on an SOW and when we use the word acceptance, what we are meaning is usually in the service context. So think about a consulting service or something you're doing custom made, maybe do logos, creative design. Even if you have a product that you make available, but you do some type of customization to it to where it's a special one off, those types of scenarios are where we're going to want to use acceptance terms. When we fail to have acceptance terms, we end up risking not getting paid for the work we've done. So, when I say acceptance terms, what am I saying? What does that mean? So, when we have these contracts and these agreements with our customers, assuming you have contracts in place, you probably say, hey, here's the work I'm going to do, and here's the timeline and price for it. Beautiful. Now, how do you know when the work is done? Is it when you deliver it? Is it when the customer says it's done? And are there any boundaries around that? So, the story that ended up happening with my client is we were going through creating custom contracts for her. And I would just love to ask, what challenges have ever come up in your business? And one of the stories she told me was that she had this client, she'd worked with him for a few months, and she does like creative design in all different types, but mostly for like logos and marketing events and those types of things. And she had done this work with this guy, and it was like their third project together. She sends the work over to him, doesn't hear back from him. So she's like, okay, good. It's good. We're done. We're finalized. So at the end of the month, she sent the guy the invoice, and then the guy never paid the invoice. And eventually she has to start following up like, hey, are you going to pay that invoice? Hey, don't forget, we have that outstanding invoice. No, dude, seriously, like you're behind on your invoice. And about a month after the invoice was overdue, so she's been waiting a long time for a payment here. She picks up the phone and calls him, and he yells at her. The work you did was horrible. It was shitty. I am not paying for this. This is outrageous. I don't like it. And she's like, what? I've been in business for 10 years. I've never had a customer complain about my work. And you were fine with all the other work we did. And most importantly, I never heard from you. So who is right here and who is wrong? Both. This is why it's important to have acceptance terms in your SOWs or your paperwork. And a common acceptance term in this scenario would have been something along the lines of, hey, upon delivery, customer has 7 days to notify if there are any revisions needed. And if no communication or revisions are needed, the delivery is deemed accepted. And accepted would then mean under the contract that its payment is due for it, that all things have been considered done because she has done her work. She has delivered what she promised she would deliver on the timeline she would deliver it. And all she's doing is waiting for payment. But it's more than payment that acceptance terms help with. Acceptance terms can help businesses in a lot of ways. An example would be, okay, so you sent a delivery, you're waiting to hear back from the client, and they get back to you a month later. Well, a month later, you might have taken on a big project, 4 big projects. You don't have the bandwidth now to take on this little revision, this thing that's going to have you over exceeding yourself and your limit just to get that payment. It helps you manage your bandwidth. It helps you manage your workload. It also helps set expectations and put into practice a rhythm and a synchronicity with your customers. They know up front they have 7 days to respond to you. And in her case, she had a client, one of her other complaints about a client was that this guy would just pick up the phone and constantly call her, constantly call her. And we're talking like Saturday, 3 a.m., call her. And she was never expecting the calls. And she didn't really know what to do because she's like, I'm not working right now. I'm even sleeping. And every time he calls me, there's no way I can be prepared to really have these conversations. So, another way with acceptance is the form that you want that communication to happen in. On a timeline, by this date, in this way. And what's great is now that you have these expectations set in the contract, you want them as a default, but you don't have to be perfect at them. When we put something in our contracts, it's the boundaries, the guidelines that you're going to use in your things. But of course, exceptions are always permitted. Life happens, business happens, and sometimes more business comes through the door from a client that you're like, of course, I'll bend over backwards to get an extra $50,000 out of you. Not a problem. How can I help? Right? So, what's great about having these in the contract is they set the core foundation. This at a minimum. You can always, your customers before they sign can look at it and be like, hey, we're too big of a company, or the way you're going to fit in to how we're doing things here, what we're going to use your services for. We need more time for feedback. I've got to get this reviewed by my marketing department as well as my sales department. And then I got to get creative sent off by my SVP. I need 3 weeks. Cool. Now you're having that open dialogue. And you can put that into the contract. 3 weeks is the acceptance rate. Not a problem. Or that upon delivery, there will be a date for the call set for follow up. And failure to appear at that call or schedule a call makes acceptance legally binding, right? So work through what is important to you. When do you consider your work done? When do you consider your part delivered? Even if revisions are open and possible to the customer, it doesn't mean they will in fact take them. So how do you want those open conversations? And building that in. And then, of course, the client can come back to you on that deadline and be like, hey, look, I'm really sorry, really swamped. I'm going to need 2 more weeks. You can then choose, sure, not a problem, 2 more weeks, but that's the most I'm going to be able to do because I have other projects, right? It creates better dialogue and communication of your expectations versus the customers. Now, when you're making acceptance terms, here's some things you're going to want to avoid. Avoid vague words. Reasonable time, okay? For small companies where you have maybe 5 clients, a reasonable time, you're waiting on that client. You're literally checking your email almost every day to be like, has that client gotten back to me? Where a big Fortune 500, a reasonable amount of time might be 28 days, right? Or even 60 days, just because of how they operate internally. So being very clear about this form of communication on this timeline renders it delivered and complete. And failure to respond with revisions in these timelines and so on makes it doable and makes the amount payable due. And when you build this into that, this is why this is really important, because acceptance terms are really key about whether or not you're going to get paid, because otherwise the other side can just sit on it, drag it out, decide last minute, you know what, this didn't work for me the way I wanted. We tried it in the market, we didn't get the response we want, so we're not going to pay you for it. Well, if response rate was not the acceptance term, then they owe you for it. They don't get to change their mind. An example on that one would be, let's say your client is a marketing company. They're hiring you to design some advertising for them. They get that advertising from you. They put it into the market and the campaign right away. And then it doesn't produce the results they want. So now they're going to come back to you and be like, well, we're not paying you. We didn't get the results we want. But you're going to be like, you didn't hire me to guarantee results. You hired me to create creative, or you hired me to write copy. That's a different deliverable. I didn't promise you a certain return. I didn't promise you a certain impact in the market or engagement or something like that. That's a possible acceptance term. It could be like, hey, we're only going to pay you if you do this and we get this much, impressions on it. That is a form of acceptance. But it's the key here is communication, making sure that is clear in the document itself, your SOWs. Of course, it can change project to project, but also be very important about every single deliverable milestone along the way. We want to encourage that open communication. And if there's not going to be communication, you're going to get paid. Because what you can do is if they refuse to pay you, be like, look, this is what we agreed to. We said If you don't respond to me by email within 7 days, I get to assume this is done. I'm happy to make an exception for you, but here's what that's going to look like. Or like, hey, I'm sorry, we can't make an exception for you. We've already moved on to other clients. This payment does become due now. And then they know that they're stuck between a contract conflict. They're either going to breach the contract and actually owe you this money, right? You could go to a collections firm or something and get this money because it is owed now. That is proven and demonstrable in the contract. And that is the key to having acceptance in your contracts, particularly with SOWs. Now I'm going to go ahead and look at the questions. If any of you, I see there's a number of you live right now. Hello. Hi, Mark. Go ahead and put your questions in, and I'll start getting to some of them. Okay. Does this ever apply to physical products? Yes. Okay. So you're right. I've been talking a lot about acceptance when it comes to like services and consulting and those type of deliverables, right? So I've said that. And you like, I'll use consulting for a second, right? Like you give the deliverable and they're like, well, this isn't the outcome we wanted, or these didn't come in the format we wanted. You can be like, well, this is what the SOW said we owed you. This is what the milestone laid out. We have delivered that, and so on. So that's just another example. But when it comes to physical products, here's how acceptance plays in. Back in the day, so we had freight on board versus, I'm actually forgetting the other phrase. So back in the day when factories made things, right? We didn't have warehouses. We didn't have Amazon and all the online quick deliveries that we have today. But back in the day, what they would have to do is they'd create something and then they put it on a third-party shipper. Today's third-party shippers are usually FedEx, UPS, DHL, USPS. That's what we use here in the United States. But back in the day, it'd be on the back of a horse in carriage. It'd be, the Wells Fargo wagon and other types of deliverables where anything could happen, maybe highway robbery or the wheel breaks on the carriage and stuff like that. So there was a big contract question of, did the seller complete their obligations when they put the widgets and the products on the carriage? Or are they responsible for what happens with the carriage until it gets delivered? So back in the day, this was a really big thing that was clarified in every contract because everyone treated it differently based on the scenarios. In today's day and age, two things have occurred. One, thanks to the Amazon and the other quick turnarounds and deliveries, we expect it to be delivered or accepted upon delivery. Upon delivery, when it's in the customer's hands, that is now kind of the standard or expectation. Will that last forever? I do not know, but that is definitely what today's market and trend is all about. It is about delivery. When it gets delivered on a person's porch, put into their hands at the factory, and so on. But the other part of what has made that possible is not just today's culture, but we have more reliable delivery systems, right? UPS, FedEx, USPS, yes, packages get lost, but compared to back in the day, it's much more reliable. We also have tracking. We can all get a sense of what's going on with something mid-transit. So for customer service reasons in the Amazon world and just normal delivery, everything online, right? Etsy and so on. But then also the reliability and trackability of our delivery systems. It does seem that nowadays it is no longer when it is put on board, that delivery system, but when it is in fact delivered. So that is how acceptance would normally be clarified and it's important still to clarify that. If you are handling physical products, please do clarify that in your contract, just in case something ever happens. You never, ever know what could happen. And that's the whole point of contracts, is to set these boundaries now to avoid headaches later. So clarifying that is important, but also being aware and mindful that that's what you're taking on. That if it does not actually make it to the other side, to the customer's hands, you are responsible. But also knowing you're responsible can be very helpful. And if you're not going to do that, if you're going to say, hey, the second it's on UPS's truck, or the second it's with FedEx's hands, I wash my hands clear of that, your customer should be put on notice of that. And that's where you put that in the contract. They want to become aware of that. So then you could say, hey, we made you aware that we do things a little differently. which is why acceptance is so important in contracts. But that is how it would apply in the physical products world. So the idea is something that applies in every single type of product, service, or offering. But we do treat it a little bit differently in how we define those characteristics when it comes to physical products versus services or something intangible. Great question. All right, what other questions do we have? What's the difference between project acceptance and payment terms? Okay, this is a great question. There is technically a difference. Project acceptance or delivered acceptance, right, is when the product is deemed delivered. When you, as the seller, when you, as the person delivering, the creative mind, the consulting company, whatever it is, you have done your job. It is considered done. Now it is time to pay for that. The customer is now responsible to pay for that. And you probably have payment terms in your contract that say, hey, once it is delivered, we will send you an invoice. Or once it's delivered, it's due, payment is due upon delivery, right? So, how you go about that payment side, the acceptance of that delivery, that being checked off the box, you're like, it's done. We have done our part as the seller. Now it switches to the payment terms. Very common in business today is to now have an invoice or a PO of some sort, right? The invoice goes out, and now there's usually a net 30 or a net 60 for them to pay that. So acceptance doesn't necessarily mean payment is due immediately, but it does now mean that the delivery, what was promised to be done to earn that payment, is complete. So that is the difference between the project or the product deliverable versus the payment of it. So you want to make sure both are very clear in your contracts, both what is delivery, what is that acceptance, when is that officially done, and then now that it's done, here's what you have to follow to pay me. So great question. That's a really good question. That might be the first time I've had that question. Should I link payment milestones to acceptance of specific deliverables? This is a SOW by SOW, project by project answer or question, really, because some projects you want a retainer up front or you want half the money in deposit up front. And then other times you're like, okay, every month we're going to have these payments across a year. And then every month here's the deliverables. And that's different than saying, hey, you're going to pay me on a monthly rate versus I will make a deliverable every month and then you pay me for that deliverable. I'm going to repeat that. Saying that you're going to pay me month by month over a 12-month period is different than saying I'm going to give you a deliverable every month and then you owe me for each of those deliverables. They are different because one is based simply on the payment terms. The other is based on the delivery of the product or the service. So going through that and understanding that there is that difference. Yes. Yeah. So making sure that the milestones of the work you're putting in, what cadence do you want to be paid? How do you want to be paid? And then at what point, no matter what, we do have this official, the project is over, right? So even if there's milestones on a month by month basis over 6 months, when do we know that the project is finally done and complete overall? That is another level of acceptance. There might be ones along the way, and there might be a big one at the end. Like, okay, once we have hit this final meeting and these things are talked about and this deliverable is in your hand, if you don't get back to us within 10 days, it is considered done and complete. So clarifying milestones, delivery milestones, and acceptance milestones along the way, plus at the end of the project, can be key to making sure. Because if you have something that's like, okay, you're going to do something, and then there's 3 milestones along the way, and one of those milestones is do revisions, right? The second round of revisions happens. Well, if you never hear back, you can't do the second round of revisions. So you might assume, well, there's no second round needed. So that's another part of the clarifying the acceptance terms of the milestones. And then, hey, the project is over once this happens. And not over as in terminated, over as in completed. it's done. We've done our job because we haven't heard from you or we haven't gotten the next step of information from you. We have the right to legally assume it's done and that we are owed payment. And because the contract says we are now owed payment, you, dear customer, cannot say it was shitty work. You now cannot say you refused to pay. You cannot change your mind about how it did or did not work for you in the end, because that's not what we promised you. We promised you this delivery output on this timeline, these ways, and to continue bringing that service, we needed to hear back from you. We didn't hear back from you. Our hands are clean. We've done our job. So that was really, really great. What if the client delays acceptance or disputes the work? Comes down to the contract. The more clarification you have in the contract, the better. So definitely having those milestones of when the deliverable, I had a client that their acceptance was like, hey, as long as what we deliver to you meets what you've listed in the SOW. This is really important because what you list in the SOW might be different than what the conversations and how the project adapts and changes over time. But how do you know which of those variables are you supposed to meet? You look back at the contract. This is what we promised. This is the timeline. And so that's what's important there. And so their acceptance was, hey, if we deliver something that meets what's in the SOW and we do not hear back from you within this amount of time, it's considered accepted. Plain and simple. So even though the conversations might change that, because they had a customer that the conversation would be the customer's like, well, now I want it to look like this. Oh, can you reformat it to this? Oh, by the way, I want to move this cell here to this cell over here and kind of combine them. Can you make them green? Where all this formatting and design was never in the SOW. So the client came to me and was like, we're tired of doing revisions for these guys. They keep coming up with something new and all these new things whenever it was originally in the scope of work. They've exceeded that. We didn't mind doing one or two in the beginning as a customer service element, but now it's gotten out of control. What do we do? I was like, let's go back to that SOW. The SOW says this is what you're going to deliver. Have you delivered everything on this list? Yes, we have. Okay. Let's look at their acceptance terms. Have they done this? They're like, yes, except they keep making these changes. Okay. Let's go talk to them about how those changes to that extent were not agreed to. So either this part of the project is done and they can open up another part of a project, another extension to the project, in which case there will be a new SOW, possibly new payment, and we're going to clarify these added things, or we get to tell them it's done. It's done, it's done, it's done. We have done our job. We've even gone above and beyond for you. We're ready to close this deal, let it be done, get our payment for it, and then you, customer, can choose, do you want to continue working with us? And this was all possible because they put those details into their SOW, including those terms of acceptance that said as long as our deliverables substantially meet what was listed in the SOW, we get to consider ourselves as done and delivered and accepted. So yeah, that was a great one. All right, we'll go for one more question. Can I include penalties for late acceptance that affect payment? Yes. The key is that it's in your contract. I had a talk with a business person just a few months ago who had this problem with one of his clients. He does both unique design of products, but then also creates those physical products. So he has both, right? He designs these things from scratch for the customer and then creates and delivers that physical product for them. So his thing was, look, some of my clients want to own the design. Some of them just want the deliverable. So what I would do is if you're late on payment, I would take one of those away. If you're late on payment, you don't get to own the rights to it, right? Those are my design rights. If you don't pay me in a timely manner for the design rights, you don't get that. I'll still deliver to you the physical product, but you're not going to get the design rights anymore because you did not honor our workflow together. You didn't honor what I'm bringing here, and you're being picky and choosy about what you want, what you don't want, how you want it. But I can't work that way, dear customer. So he sets that right in his contract. If you are more than 15 days late on a payment, you lose the rights to this portion of what you're buying. Yeah, so stuff like that, you can absolutely do it. Of course, from a customer service perspective, how you pick and choose to put that into your contracts, be mindful. I would not put, a page and a half of just all the little things and penalties. Like that's customers aren't going to like look at that and be like, that sounds great to work with them. They're very picky about everything. But having a line, absolutely. The most common one I've seen in contract is usually a percentage, a fee. For every 30 days you're late, there's a 5% late fee added. Most big companies will cross that off, saying that that's not how they operate. So you might want to pick something else that you can do in there. But can you put a penalty? Absolutely, absolutely. There is nothing illegal about penalties, as long as the penalty isn't death or jail or something like that. But if it's in your business context, you can do whatever you feel is appropriately reasonable for your business in your contract. It's the whole point of a contract, because the laws don't put that there. The laws are very, very general and generic, even to the point where you kind of wonder how the world functions with them. They're so overly simple that the reason we have contracts is to make and set these boundaries and clarify that communication. Yeah, it's one of the key reasons we do contracts. None of that's required. None of that is legally required. Other than if you have physical products over $500, you need something in writing, but it doesn't have to be a full contract. Everything else we do it because it's the right thing by our business. All right, all this has been Acacia, the CEO Legal Coach. You can always find me at ceolegalcoach.com. And don't forget, I always have that freebie on there. Go ahead and grab that because it's going to be changing soon. Right now, it's that free non-disclosure agreement, including the customization guide. It's great for all your B2B relationships. So like your customers, your suppliers, your vendors, it's going to be phenomenal for you. We've also rolled out the group coaching for that. So if you want to be part of that community, that is available right now as well. It's called NDA Today. And then, like I said, that freebie is changing soon. So if you want to be part of that NDA world, definitely get in there now. And